Howdy fucking doody, and welcome to season 6, episode 11 of Duelist Unity. I am having a whole lot more fun taking myself just a little bit less seriously every single day. Sometimes I feel like I should be taking bigger chunks. Like, no, it's okay. It's actually easier to digest things the smaller bites you take. You think about eating a meatball sandwich. You eat that thing in 3 bites, that's going to be a fucking hellstorm on your stomach, on your digestive tract. It's got to do a lot of work. But if you take your time, you're a little bit more patient, a little bit more willing to just take in some of the flavors instead of guzzling that fucking thing as quick as you possibly can, there's going to be more appreciation. You're going to pay attention to a little bit more. You're going to learn a little bit more on the way. And so you assuming that you should be have let go of everything at this point is just going to make it a lot more difficult to do it right now, to take the little nibble. If you're assuming that you got to take those big bites, just keep taking the little nibbles of that meatball sub, and you're going to enjoy it quite a bit more.
Because the important part is that you've already decided to eat it. See, that's the thing, is you've already decided to change direction. You spent your entire life eating another meal that you called identity, the idea of you, and you committed to eating that meal step by step, bite by bite, day by day, forever. And now you've got another sub and you've got another idea of yourself that is freedom. And you think, well, I just got to get through that meal and it's going to unpack, but it's not about that at all. It's about changing the direction, which you've already done. You've already done by just not committing to the other sub, to the other sandwich. You've already done it by just recognizing identity does not work the way you think it does. And so it is just entirely possible that all of those thoughts that you're going through right now is the process of letting go of your belief in thought. And these are just the residual thoughts that are kind of throwing a kicking and screaming tantrum because they want you to pay attention to them as you move beyond them, as you start to realize that they're not real. So perhaps the thoughts that you're still going through right now, it's not that you have to tackle each and every one of them, just that you have to keep continuing to ask yourself why you're so committed to them being true.
With all of that said, I hope you enjoy this live stream that is season 6, episode 11 of Duelistic Unity. Oh man, these are fun. Like when it's just like I have no fucking idea what's gonna happen here. I don't even know how I'm gonna start it.
Life in a
Shit,
nutshell,
man.
right? All right, man, it is so weird to be, what are we now? About halfway through season 6. It's just clipping along so fast since the Netherlands retreat, that I find it funny that I rarely think about how far we are now. Like, it almost never dawns on me how many episodes we've recorded anymore because I'm really just getting more and more involved with the conversation. And I find that transition to be so very interesting because it's kind of like the podcast has been, I guess, my way of allowing myself to get further into this conversation. And I've kind of always known that because I was as deep into this conversation as I could get on my own until finally it was the recognition, right? I'm talking to myself. There's no conversation that needs to be had. And then all of a sudden, my world just exploded. And there are people having this conversation with me now that at one point I would have told you likely I would never run into them. I've run into like half a dozen people in my life up until DU that would have this conversation before getting defensive, getting uncomfortable, finding something to hold against me in order to just build some kind of a buffer. And now we have a community of 10, 15,000 strong, many of which are talking to one another, encouraging one another, coming to some of the groups. It's just crazy, but I'm so invested in the experience of this that it doesn't even dawn on me which episode we're on. Like right now, I couldn't even tell you what episode number this is. It's that fucking irrelevant. And it's just that irrelevant because the conversation is the point. And it's not even the conversation that's the point, is it? It's the ease of the conversation that's the point. It's the fact that I can have faith in myself, be here, express who I am, and not immediately run into the illusion of control just because I'm afraid of what might happen next. So this has been just a transformative 2 years and 20 years and month. And it's just, there's just so much change. And I'm so goddamn excited about it. Truly.
Oh yeah, it's kind of insanely exciting in the sense of like how I have a lot more appreciation for why, we hold on to our sense of certainty, hold on to our feeling like, no, I can be in control. Yeah. No, I can definitely do that. Because when you're not feeling like it is, or you are so much in control or certain of anything whatsoever, like there's an intensity to the experience, sort of, but it is freedom. It's kind of like how intense would it be to learn how to fly? For example, that'd be crazy if you weren't used to it. And so, man, in a world like everyone's kind of coming from a situation or some degree of an investment in no, I can have control. No, I can get certainty. I can be sure of this despite never being able to the entire time, like never actually being able to be sure. So then we just can have this tendency to revert to being sure about ourselves, because okay, if I can't actually be sure of as much of the things that I thought I could be sure of, then at least I can think about myself in a very specific way. But that's as uncertain as how your day is going to go, as who is going to be at the grocery store when you go to the grocery store later. Like, as certain as that situation is tomorrow, is as certain as you are to yourself. But it's just gotten so familiar. It's like, no, it must be that. And so then we'll like keep doing the same things over and over almost to reinforce that narrative, to reinforce that story, just for the sake of being sure of something, just for the sake of like feeling like I'm in control of something. I can control myself. I can control myself to exist in this very, narrow, specific tunnel. And I have that. I have that power despite not being able to be so, and despite it being super, super uncomfortable. Like imagine trying to confine yourself if you're I don't know, everything, reality, into a very specific point of view. Like, of course, that's going to be uncomfortable, but then the discomfort will respond to with, oh, I'm going to feel better because of this assumption. So I'm going to buy this thing or do this thing or get this adoration or admiration. But of course, it's uncomfortable to try and condense yourself into a very specific narrative or perspective even. And then if we're not willing to recognize, like, maybe that's not me, maybe I'm not sure of that, then I'm gonna respond in a bunch of different ways. It's like, no, because I can be sure of that, and it's definitely this way, and it's definitely this specific narrative that's been built based on, different experiences that I've had throughout my life and in the past and things that have happened in my life. But if you can't be quite so sure of that, then what you're left with is just the moment to moment experience of uncertainty. And then you can fluctuate a lot. And that, the spectrum of all the emotions, all the feelings, all the things that you could do or say or act like comes into play when you're not making the assumption that you can be sure of anything. And then all the things that you would do in response to that discomfort because you thought it shouldn't be there, like, they don't make as much sense anymore. It's like, "Oh, yeah, that was a response because, I made this assumption or did that," as opposed to just looking at the discomfort itself when you're not so sure. It's like, "I'm not so sure of anything right now, and that's really uncomfortable, and that's okay." But if that's okay, and, like, how I'm feeling right now, no matter how intense or how uncomfortable it seems, can be okay, then I don't have to run to, a soothing sort of temporary soothing feeling. Then it's like, what is Krishnamurti said, I don't mind what's my perspective on the world or whatever. Like, I don't mind what happens. It's like, what's your superpower? I don't mind what happens. And so that I guess includes, your moment to moment experience or feelings. I don't I don't mind how I'm feeling. And if I don't have to feel differently than I am right now, then I can keep paying attention. It's like that. My opinion about how I'm feeling, like that clip you threw out last week, that's what's in the way all the time. But if I don't have such an opinion about myself or an opinion about how I'm feeling, thinking like, no, I know, then then you're just left with what's actually happening, not your assumptions about it.
Man, I gotta say, I loved something that you said there early on, especially was that, of course, it's uncomfortable when you take everything and you limit it down to a singular perspective, or even an ever evolving perspective coming from a singular point. And that's exactly what life is, isn't it? It's uncomfortable. So discomfort and existence kind of go hand in hand. And that's been true every step of the way. I mean, even when we were born, leaving the womb, for example, right? Yeah, whole new level of freedom, whole new level of of discomfort, right? All of a sudden, you had sound and light and air and heat and cold and all of this stuff, and it's all very overwhelming. But that's kind of the point, right? Is that with that perspective of division, with that experience of individuality, is conflict, is the perspective of division, is the temptation to in fact view it as conflict, right? Because they go hand in hand. So life and discomfort, kind of go, they are the same thing, right? In that growth is always kind of uncomfortable as well. And we try to run from that in a lot of ways. We try to run from discomfort and thus we run from growth. And it's just because when we are uncomfortable, it's an excellent opportunity for us to work down what it is that's making us uncomfortable, which is usually some hardline position that we've held on to in order to identify ourselves or feel more valuable or feel right? Because if that's being challenged, that's what's uncomfortable, including your own perspective of your own ability, of your own capability to move forward and not doubt each and everything you do. That is a belief that you hold on to, that you must think about it, that you must establish some sense of control rather than just moving forward and having influence. And that is a belief that we rarely question because it makes us uncomfortable to do so. But isn't that the funny part? It's that discomfort that leads us to continue to move past what we thought our limitations were. It's very easy to get comfortable with who you think you are, but then you stay that way, or rather, you perceive yourself to stay that way, and it creates even more conflict with everything around you that is changing. Which is why it's really hard for elderly people who don't want to learn about new technology, and it's just because they don't see it as relevant. They don't want to do it. There's a resistance, but nonetheless, they are hindered day by day by day by their inability to work with technology. And although it's obvious to them that that's the case, they will still maintain the idea, I don't need that. I've never needed that. We didn't need that in my day, right? And you've heard these arguments, though I am happy to say far less now. Like, it was way worse when the internet first came about in like the late 90s, mid 90s, and early 2000s. There was a huge resistance to technology as a whole by the older generations, but kind of become ubiquitous to everything in our life. Like, you can't walk down the street without seeing 10 people all holding phones or wireless devices or something like that. So it's very difficult for us to avoid at this point. But, that said, at some point our technology is going to change again. It's going to turn into something else, and then generations that are used to the way it is now are going to resist that. It's kind of like music, right? So often we're like, oh, music was better in my day, and although sometimes that's true, often it's just personal bias. Right, and that's not to say that there isn't some degeneration in the music industry, because that is certainly the case. That said, we are currently recording this episode live, and we are doing so because although we really enjoy chatting with one another and having this conversation, we also want you to be a part of this. And so it's kind of a Q&A episode, more or less. If you're aware of this episode being recorded today, you are welcome to throw in a question, a topic, something. We do ask that if you can, um, don't ask things that we've already covered. Or if you have asked things that we've already covered, do understand that it's just possible we're not going to cover it again unless something new comes up in terms of an insight, right? And specifically, I'm addressing one question, which was about if we could talk about Jesus and Buddha and Lao Tzu. And I do want to address this because there was something to this question that actually did catch my attention. So discussing the overall messages of Jesus with the Father, Lao Tzu, and the Tao, Buddha and Krishnamurti's style of not using specific names, but their overall teachings to freedom itself. Now, I thought that was really interesting, just because they're two different things, like in a lot of ways, because Jesus and well, Jesus on his own. Let's just take Jesus and put him aside. He was talking about God, like straight up talking about God, and he was doing so in a way that causes a lot of difficulty and conflict. Right? I get what he was saying, or at least I think I get what he was saying, more or less. And I always go back and forth with this because, you see, it's not that there isn't a God; it's that that is not what you think it is. That is in fact you in your complete working. And you see, now what's funny there is people, oh, it's source consciousness. That's not what I said. That isn't what I said at all. Right? It is you in your whole capacity as everything, which is to remove all division. Okay, because all perceived division isn't there. Okay, so even the idea of you as an individual within something, right there, you've lost the entire notion of God, which is why it goes back to what Lao Tzu was saying, the Tao that can't be told, right? It's not a concept. You know, that's why the Tao Te Ching, or the book of the way, right? It's just the way. It's like, well, what way? They don't even get into that. It's not the right way by any means, which is kind of cool, right? But that's why, in my opinion, Jesus was kind of barking up the wrong tree. While I think he was doing a good thing in terms of faith and recognizing unity, I think that the reference to the Father was as confusing as a reference to source or a reference to God. And I think that the concept of God is unfortunately probably one of the worst ones that we've ever held on to, instead of being the most skeptical of, because it's such a big concept. Isn't that funny? The bigger the concept, the more skeptical we should be.
Yeah, it's like it's a direct reflection. And it's interesting how with God, it's basically just the ability to worship the ego, like ability to worship my idea of my highest self. And because as soon as there's some idea of God created me as something separate, it's like me created me. But like, what do you mean by me? Is it your thoughts about yourself? Is it where you think your skin ends? So like what exactly do you mean by that? And there's got to be a lot of certainty that's reinforcing that idea. And so with, you know, any talks of God, then brings you into needing to use your mind for it too and to think about it too. And so if you couldn't, and it's interesting that there's such a strong hesitation to not being able to use your mind or not thinking so much, because that's where all my false certainty comes from. But if I didn't use my mind, if I couldn't use my mind, then I couldn't be sure of anything at all. And then like you can glaze over it almost really quickly and just like not want to dig into that. And it's like, no, if you couldn't think, if you couldn't use, those thoughts, then you couldn't be sure. Then you couldn't know for sure any of it. And then it's like, okay, well, then immediately it's like, well, you can't prove that he's not. You can't prove that. And it's the same mechanism, just flipped on its head instead of recognizing that in and of itself. And so anyway, I know that question was brought up in reference to something we've discussed many, many, many a time, but it's fun to, revisit.
Well, this is why, but again, as soon as it becomes an ism, right, or an itty, right, as soon as it's Christianity or Taoism or Buddhism, it immediately loses the point, And this is why, like, you go a little bit further, and then you look at Buddhism. Buddha was just saying it's just you. That's the funniest part, is that to Buddha there was no God to talk about. There was just the experience of you. And so Buddha was really, getting to a point that was important as well. And then it became Buddhism, which means now you're a collective. Now you immediately identify as a philosophy or within a certain structure, which completely destroys what Buddha was trying to say, was that everything is the experience of you. Everything. Which is why at one point he closed his eyes and said, I just experienced 10,000 lives. Because they all exist now. Right. And like he was making a point about subjective reality, which I always find really fascinating. And then, of course, there's Krishnamurti, who, in my opinion, was taken too seriously. And that made it very difficult for him to act less seriously because there are periods in his talks where he actually kind of lets his hair down, as it were. And he becomes quite frank with you. It's kind of like what Andrew was saying earlier when he leaned forward and he's like, do you want to know what my secret is? And everybody's like, yeah. And he's like, I'm okay with everything. And everybody just kind of, they were puzzled by that. And some people were totally aghast by that. I've heard people get upset by even me just bringing up this point. Say, well, what does that mean? Because immediately you get, the atrocities. Immediately you get like, so you're okay with war and you're okay with genocide and you're okay with, human trafficking and all that. And what he was trying to say was, I'm not in conflict with it. Right? I'm not in conflict with it because it really does nothing to be against war. War is a reality. You being against it doesn't stop it from being a reality. But you not being a violent person works at it not being a reality. But you being against war itself, it's kind of like being against God. It doesn't matter. It doesn't do a thing, in fact, except change your life and your experience. And that's the point, is I'm against this. Well, I'm sure that's very self-validating. But what are you doing with your life right now? But if you're self-validating, that means you're judging. Right? And that's where empathy becomes very difficult. So if you are against war, for example, and you run into somebody who is quote unquote for war, you are less likely to empathize with why and actually have a conversation with them about that underlying bedrock because you are against them, because you have taken a side that validates you, that you will not question because it would tear you down. And so all of a sudden communication becomes impossible. And so being against anything, being in conflict with reality, does nothing except keep us in conflict with ourselves.
Ooh, well said. Because then it's like you're existing in a vacuum. Like why are you against this or why are you for this? It's like because it makes me feel better about my perspective of myself. But then you're going to be way less sensitive and way less empathetic and just not even willing get to a point that it's like, no, I am anti this and that makes me feel very good about myself. And there's no additional interaction with anyone or anything because it's not necessary. Because no, I'm good because I'm anti this because I have this perspective and this is the right perspective and this is the correct perspective and this is the perspective that allows me to just continue to be sure of myself without having any actual impact on the thing that I'm sure of. And it's like a very, very superficial, shallow way to settle is even like taking a hard stance on something. It's the same sort of thing, but taking a hard stance is like the easy way out in a sense, as opposed to remaining open. But you have to sacrifice yourself in a sense to remain open. Because so much of me, so much of you is my hard and fast opinion, perspective on this thing. And so you have to be willing to not be sure of that thing that you're holding on to very tightly that makes you feel like you're a good person. I'm anti this, I'm anti, killing babies. It's like fucking congratulations. Does that really make you feel good? And then someone who does something like that, there's not even and this is an extreme hypothetical that I didn't mean to necessarily run with, but when someone is doing that, like you're going to be way less willing to even look at them, like even see them. Oh fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, Marie. and and so there's not even going to be any push. It's like identifying being anti this or that is stagnation. Like identity is stagnation. Like all my, mechanisms of certainty are just points in which I've become stagnant once I maintain that perspective of myself. There's no more growth in that. There's no more fluidity, there's no more discussion, there's no more conversation. It's just I have this perspective now, and now I'm just going to stagnate. Now this point on this, stagnate there, this point on this, stagnate there, this point on this, stagnate there, to some degree. And like maybe it's not fully 10 feet down in the ground, but it's a couple feet. And yeah, you can wiggle a little more when it's a foot into the ground versus 10 feet into the ground, that stake of false certainty. But it's harder to do. And so it's like those are the points that we stop growing or wanting to grow or even have impact. Like I'll take this perspective. Like someone was just responding. I think we responded. You responded while I was responding to them, which is funny. But about how can you relax? Is the video I just posted. I'm wearing the same thing if you're looking for it. How can you relax when there's awful things going on in the Middle East? And you know my response was that those are all a product of, and who's to say those aren't just a product of a world that is tense and certain and sure. Because you think about war, it's like it's two groups that are absolutely fucking sure about themselves. Like they know for a fact this is the case, and this group also knows for a fact that this is the case, and they keep, button up against each other. So maybe it's not one or the other, because maybe that's always been the thing. And war is the expression of those big enough certainties with enough power and man force behind them clashing. So like is being sure on one side gonna perpetuate that mentality that's informing that? But I don't want to look at the mentality, because that means there's something I can do about it in my life the way I'm living it right now. And I don't want that sort of responsibility. It's them. They got to change. I know the right thing to do, but they have to do it. I can't do that in my own life. But when it's a mentality, then it's your mentality all the time. And these are all expressions and like further on the spectrum of some sort of the mentality. And then they're just the extreme bubbling up again. So to think that no, I know this. I'm on the right side. No, I'm on the right side. It's like, fuck, take a step back. You're both you're thinking the same thing, that you're sure of yourself. So maybe it's not one or the other. Maybe it's that, being so goddamn sure of yourself.
I really like something that you said there in terms of just the size of our conflicts are often directly correlated to the size of our assumptions. And it's so very interesting, which is why, religious war, right? Or even nationalism. Because what is the assumption behind nationalism? That I am Canadian and that you're American. And that is an assumption based on nothing, based on a fictional line in the sand that doesn't even exist in the actual goddamn sand. That's the funniest part, right? Is that it doesn't change anything about us, but we make the assumption that it does, because that assumption is self-validating, because it ties us to our community, because it makes us fit in, right? It's part of our environment, which is why each country indoctrinates us. Each country teaches us the national anthem, makes us stand up in class at the beginning of the day. Each country does all of that. And yet we're all going through the same kind of conditioning. The only thing that's changed is the skin, is the name of the country, and possibly the flag. It's the same kind of conditioning, though. It's identifying with a group. Isn't that interesting? It's just the assumption I belong to this group. It's like, no, you don't, because without that assumption, you belong with all of us here now. We are all in this together, but it's our assumption that causes conflict. It's our assumptions that cause division, and then we run with that, and we act accordingly. That all said, perhaps we should get to the next question, because we really went off on that one. So it's funny, because as I was saying, we might not cover that question at all, and we ended up covering that question for quite some time. So thank you to Epic on our Discord server. If you're not on our Discord, by the way, definitely consider joining our Discord. We say a lot of fun stuff on there. We do have a question from our last Q&A episode. I'm going to throw this out to Andrew. I just received a past life reading, and it was very interesting. What do you think about these readings, Andrew?
All right. Hmm. So I haven't thought about this in a long time. So I mean, I guess realizing that, you're here in your mind, you're getting certain readings, certain perspectives about a certain, you know, quote unquote past life. And if division is just an illusion, it's just something that we continue to perceive, and you're not actually disconnected from anything at all, and there isn't actually a disconnect from moment to moment to moment, and you're just experiencing right now continuing to change or just seamlessly continuing through each and every moment, then there's no disconnect between, you and your parents. Where's that line drawn? Between your parents and your grandparents, where's that line drawn? And so, and it's uncomfortable, but like there isn't, like, you want to get really meticulous with it, and it's like, no, at this point this shifted, but like that wasn't disconnected from whatever happened before and whatever happened before that. And so I think with any sort of past life reading, it's like, yeah, no shit, because you've been all of them. You've been all of the lives that have ever been, that have ever happened. Like it's all just you. And that's not something to believe. It's just, when you're not making so many assumptions, when you're not trying to be sure of everything all the time, that's where you're left. That's what you're left with. It's like, oh, if there isn't anything that I can be sure of, if there is no disconnect from moment to moment to moment, then there's nothing that's ever been separate from me. There's no experience that's ever been separate from me. And so all of this isn't just a reflection of me, because that implies that like there's a me that's like reflecting something, but it's all just me, and that's not what that's never going to be what you think, because immediately, oh, it's all you. It's like, oh, it's this, what I think I am kind of expanded through everything. It's like it's what's left, but at the same time, like, to like that's a component of it, but it's all conceptual, and immediately you're in conflict with stuff. And so anyway, the past life regressions and whatnot. It's like, yeah, it makes sense, but it's not. And like, quickly want to be like, oh, that validates some component of my story. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. This and that. And it's like, because it's all kind of like, it's all reflective in the sense that it is you. Like, it's one, talk about one body, cells within the body, but that spans for every historical thing that's ever sort of happened. And so it's not just, you go through your life and you experience certain traumas and whatnot, or situations, but that shit reverberates through all of life, like all of eternity, like and it's like we see certain conflict in our own life as, individual humans, but then as a society, there's like collective trauma and shifts. And we see that go back and forth between, going through world wars to depressions to more wars to, and this back and forth. It's like generational trauma. And like everyone's kind of stemming from that, because we're not disconnecting our experience. And so, society and culture and stuff, it makes sense why there's, waves and swells of certain things. We're seeing a resurgence in certain, psychedelic substances and cannabis a little bit more. And that's, from a component of this mentality that's kind of in conflict with this mentality. So anyway, I know it was starting with the the past life stuff, but just kept running with that. So
Hey,
those are some words.
it's exactly what the question is for, is to see what the hell comes out of it, right? I really find it interesting because I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've done past life regression. Like, I went to past life regression before, and I always find it really interesting because, on the other hand, I've also been, a participant in a great many other things, including theater groups, including, therapy groups, including all kinds of other fun stuff. And what's really interesting, and we were saying this earlier on in the episode, in the same way that you and I experienced a very similar experience in our life, in that we had authority figures, we had parents, we had schools, institutions, a country around us, and there was beliefs, and there was certain concepts, and there was religion, and there was certain ways to identify. And it's funny because both of our lives were totally different, and yet at the same time, all of that was true. And it's kind of true in every life, everywhere. There's an environment, there's a social structure, there are certain experiences. And so I find it really interesting because all you really need to do is just pick a character. You could pick any situation you like. I could talk to you about a lifetime when you were walking down the docks outside of a city that was surrounded with a giant brick wall, not bricks in the red brick kind, but in the old brick kind. And it was they're all cut stones. And that wall surrounded the city because it was on the side of the island where, of course, there were occasionally pirates and other attackers and whatnot. And you're walking down the dock and the water is lapping around you, and you can see the sun going down over the horizon and the clouds coming up across the water, kind of indicating that you might have a storm later on. So you can see all of that in your head. Now, what's interesting is that I'm just talking to you about it, and you've already filled in what you're feeling. You've already filled in what you're thinking. You're already filling in everything about the character who's walking down the fucking dock. Now, was that a past life or a potential life? And the answer is yes. And so, why are these experiences why do they resonate so much when they do? Because you're putting yourself in the position of that person and you're filling in the blanks yourself. Because the blanks are always going to be there in every life. Every story has the potential for how you look at yourself, has the same potential for how you feel about yourself, how you perceive the world, all that stuff. And so any story that you can put yourself into, you're going to put yourself currently into, which means you're going to resonate with a past life story that possibly was totally fucking different, but you filled in the details. Right. And that's kind of the point with psychics as a whole as well. They will often tell you something that's very general and that just allow you to fill in the details. And we do because we want to believe. We do because we want an answer. We do because we actually want to limit ourselves down to that's the lesson. That's it right there. That's why I'm here. And all of that. Right. And once you let all of that go, then you can learn from every life that you could ever possibly imagine and every life that you could ever possibly interact with and every life accordingly, because it's all you, it's all life. Right? It's just this idea of the past that throws us off. And it's so very interesting because I find it funny. The idea of the past stops with death. The idea of the future stops with death. The experience of time stops with death. And it's not that y- time stops, it's that time never existed, just the experience of it. Right? So all of this is happening in potential, but it's all happening in potential within reality, and that's you. Which is why you can imagine so many past lives and future lives if you really want to. Thing is, you're less likely to want to do that because you can't bullseye a certain scenario. You can't bullseye. It's like I remember in the future when the skyscrapers reach the clouds, and you're like you can't necessarily guarantee that's going to happen. So you're less likely to try and imagine the future because you can't. There's a lot more doubt there, but you can imagine the past because you got a bare handful of scraps of information about it. This is why history is so misleading, right? Like we'll read a history book and they actually assume we know what the fuck happened, and we don't. Right? It's just details. We're just told dates and times and some abstract kind of story of what happened. We're not told what the person was thinking, feeling, the interactions that happened behind closed doors. Hell, we're even told things that didn't actually happen. That's pure speculation, right? And that's the whole point, is that it's a story. We never actually know. So that would be my thoughts on past life regression experiences. It's not that there's no value there, it's just recognizing what the value is. So I've asked the last two questions, Andrew. It's up to you now.
Yeah, I'll get to that. It reminded me of just his history, his story, like how unsure it fucking is. Like it is kind of hearsay in a lot of ways. And it's just like, no, that's really uncomfortable to realize that maybe, the whole story of history and like what I think I remember is entirely entirely not what actually happened, because it's not what actually happened ever. And like different countries will tell different histories. And so like which one happened? Like if one country tells one history where they won a certain war and another country tells another history where they won that same war, then like we can't actually even know which things happened or how they happened. But it's like, whoa, hold on, wait a second. Because there's multiple histories for a lot of historical situations and things that went on. So like you can't really be sure of anything, but like Yeah, it's like that's fucking uncomfortable as shit. Because but then what are you left with? What thing are you sure of that you're left with right now? Like this is all you actually know. And so and that whole fucking thing with the beginning, if there's no beginning, then this is the beginning. If there's no beginning whatsoever, then this is it. And then there's not really so much of a timeline anymore. And the fullness of your experience is just how much you're paying attention to right now. But when we have a story, we'll nitpick at all the things that are happening right now. Only what is it? Your brain, they call it your reticular activation system. You only notice certain things, usually based on what you're thinking about. You're looking up red cars, all of a sudden you notice, like, whoa, are there a lot more red cars? So you start telling yourself a story about yourself, you start noticing that more. And it becomes a sort of self fulfilling prophecy unless you recognize that that's not all the information. That's not certain. You're not in control. You can't do things to know that for sure. You're just noticing specific things that are validating this story and narrative you have about yourself. So anyway. um all right. Oh, we'll get this one out of the way. Do you play hide the sausage on retreats? We do not. We do not play that game. No, not really sure exactly what that is, and I'm not going to ask either. So, um, well, here's another one. I can take this first quick. Tired of my 9 to 5. Any suggestions of how to get out? Um, so I think there's a lot of ways you can think about this or wonder about this. I do think that Duelist Unity Life Troubleshooter be a great place to start with a question like that because there is so much both nuance and detail and things that ways of looking at it that you could do that it's going to factor in a lot of those. But real quick, I think taking that time, if it is a 9 to 5, like you do have more time throughout the day. You sleep a certain amount of time, you eat a certain amount of time, but there is some free time in there. And so it really comes down to you, like how badly do you want to not be working this 9 to 5? Then maybe some of that free time goes towards working on something else that you may want to do or trying your hand at a certain thing. But until that point, also being willing to factor in all of the other considerations about, what is it you're really not liking about 9 to 5, because there's a lot of things that factor into that situation. And so like being more honest about that instead of just assuming like if I do something else, it's going to be better. And I know that, like being willing to, you know, kind of take a step back, relax, take a deep breath, and actually think on, where this aversion is coming from, and then taking, some of that free time to maybe focus on something else and see if that's something you actually want to do, more so than the 9 to 5. But there's also a bunch of different types of 9 to 5s, and it's just, a means of scheduling your day at the end of the day. But I hear you.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny. I have a varied opinion on this, and for everybody watching on TikTok at the moment, we were asked about perspectives on leaving your 9 to 5. Uh, you can do it in a couple of different ways, but as always, you can err. You can lean a little bit too much, and what I mean is that you could play it out carefully, where you are saving, get an idea of what you want to do. You start learning about the business that you want to get into, the entrepreneurial path that you want to take yourself, and then so you save up, you get a good cushion. You do what you can in your part time, and do all that, and then after years and years and years of part timing it, you finally get to a transition point where you can go into it full time, and that's how your life changes. So that's one path. Now, the problem is that you can err too much on the side of caution, in which case you never actually end up committing enough to go from part time to full time. And because you don't make that transition to full time, it can never become a full time endeavor. And so there's always going to be that need to leap. There's always going to be that requirement for you to take that risk, to take that chance, even with careful planning, even with sitting there and counting your pennies and making sure you've got yourself covered. You still don't know. So you're never going to feel totally comfortable leaving that secure job for a path that's not the 9 to 5. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The alternative to that is throwing caution to the wind, quitting your job, doing it the hard way, slugging it out, doing whatever the fuck you need to do. And sometimes that means like working, a couple of odd jobs to make to pay your bills while you put all of your extra time and attention and sleepless nights into your passion, into your business, into what you want to make. And you can do that. It's just a lot harder. You may have to give up some things, is what I'm saying. You may have to scale down how you live. You may have to sell a few things. You may have to go through it the hard way. And then, the thing about that path is it's going to teach you humility. It's going to teach you didn't need any of those things to be who you are. It's going to teach you how strong you are. It's also going to teach you what your priorities are. Because when you go through that much fucking hardship, you don't give up. You're like, I've been through this much. I'm going to keep going. And then when you finally do get to that point where it is your full-time endeavor and it's paying, because it's been your full-time endeavor for God knows how long up until that point, but when it's paying, you look back and you realize how much you learned, not just about the business, but about yourself. And that is just another leap. And I guess that's the point, is you're going to have to leap regardless. The question is when, and how much hardship and challenge are you willing to face along the way? But it's going to be difficult one way or another, because you're either sticking with the job that you don't like in order to get to the job that you do, or you're saying, fuck it, and you're going straight into uncertainty. And then it's all about what you make of each and every moment. But if that's true then that's true at work too. So there's no right path.
Well fucking said. I like how you you took my hesitancy. You're just like, that's one way. Yep. And this is actually a way that you're probably gonna learn a fuckload more about yourself and diving on in, because one way or another, doing it anyway. At the end of the day, like we were talking about on Patreon before, you can come up with all the fucking thoughts about a situation, considerations, pros and cons lists, analyze this, analyze that, break down this data, do this, do that. But at the end of the day, you're still jumping in. You're still stepping into something that you don't know, one way or the other. And even if you keep the 9 to 5 job, you still don't know what tomorrow is necessarily going to bring throughout your life. So, anyway, yeah, well said.
Um, do you have any more questions? I got one from our Discord community.
Yeah, throw that in.
Let's do that.
Sure.
All right. Current stitch I'm working through is recognizing that I have been displacing my own judgment of myself onto another. The kicker is that it involves money or a job, which is something that one needs to live, but where does that end and the judgment about what it means about me end? So this is a tricky one. And again, like it's difficult because on the one hand, you're like, you need to get a job, you need to participate, you need to, do all that. And so I can only assume that this is either like a partner, somebody that you're living with, or a kid, possibly. And I would say that it really just comes down to what you're willing to do and what you're willing to put up with. And I don't just mean put up with in terms of them. I mean put up with in terms of your life. So what I mean is that, so let's just say it's in regards to a spouse or a partner. Okay. And they're not working, they're not paying the bills, they're not doing all that. You don't have to stay with that person. You don't have to stay with that person, and you can communicate that they're not keeping up their end of the bargain. And if they don't care, then that's a good indication that you should likely not stay with that person. And the reason is simply, as you said, this is about survival, right? It's not just about the luxuries, unless it is, which is a different story. But if this is just about survival and they're not contributing, then there are lessons that they need to learn that they will never learn, so long as you are willing to float the boat, as long as you are willing to be responsible for them. And so that's an important, I guess, consideration in the whole thing. That said, though, if they're working through something, and this can get pushed too far, but if they're working through something and at some point their head's going to come firmly out of their ass and they're going to look around and change their direction, then you can continue to just put up with it and just wait for that to change. Another point would be the fact that hounding them is often going to send them farther into their mind, where they're less likely to get a job as well. And if they do, it's just to satisfy you, and then they're only working as much as they need to shut you up, and that changes everything. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, it really just comes down to your intent, and how much you know about them, because there's no bit of advice that's going to be universal here. whatsoever. So it really comes down to you. And I think you already know your answer. I think you may just not like it.
Yeah. And so that realization that like you can't really know as much as yeah, there's certain responses, certain reactions to a decision. It doesn't mean that it was the wrong one because people are responding with where they're at right now. They're not responding with the context of everything else that's going on or what may come because neither of you are sure of that right now at all. And so you don't really know which one is best, but there is, sensitivity, which shout out chapter 2 of our new book is all about that sensitivity and the benefits of sensitivity just to reality because that's all you're left with when everything is uncertain. So it's funny because we'll talk about uncertainty and for a question like this, it's like, yeah, you don't know, you have no idea, but there is sensitivity. And like we do have that. We don't have control, but we have influence. And so it's not like you're left with nothing. You're left with yourself right now, an ability to do things. But I think sometimes feeling like, oh, you can't be sure of anything kind of misconstrues it into thinking that you're not left with anything. It's like, oh, well, then whatever happen. And it's like, no, but there's things happening. It's just you can't be sure of it or what it means or where it's going. You can just know that no, there is something happening and you can have a sensitivity to it, but that's decreased a lot when you make assumptions about which thing about it is even best. Like what I think is best is like cutting down on that sensitivity. And so it's always on a spectrum, but they go kind of hand in hand. The more you believe that you can have control, the less influence you're going to have right now. The more willing you are to let go of control, the more influence you're going to have right now. It's like, fucking, how far does that go? Because has control been something that does anything besides just allow you to feel a little bit more comfortable? But if, as we were saying before, it's not so much about how you feel right now and you don't worry so much, if that's not your first measurement, you wake up in the morning, how do I feel right now? And immediately make a decision on how to spend your day or what to do in the morning to make yourself feel good. Because like how much are we missing out on from feeling good too? And like that's just one side of the spectrum. There's a whole other experience to not feeling as good. And I guess that's, comfort versus discomfort. And there's sort of like, oh yeah, positive, negative connotation there, but that's not the case. They're just indicative. Comfort's indicative of stagnation as much as it's indicative of feeling good. Discomfort's indicative of, you know, non-stagnation. What was it? Growth. Discomfort's indicative of growth and the ability to have faith in yourself and grow, and continue to shift and change. And so it's like there's certain things we'll prioritize in the world, but then discount, you know, the other end of that immediate spectrum and the entire experience there and the spectrum of experience that comes from not being so fucking overly concerned with how I feel right now. Because when that's not on the table anymore, then there isn't so much concern about whatever's going on. Because you can be cool with feeling however. And that goes, in a lot of fucking directions, and some of that deeper shit maybe you experienced throughout your life. It's like there is aversions to certain feeling certain ways. But as soon as those are back on the table, then it's like you're a little bit more free. And it's like those, I don't want to feel that way. So I'm going to not act or put myself in a situation where that could possibly happen again. But it's like it only hit so hard because you were in the process of becoming more and more sure instead of less and less sure. And so from time to time, you can dip your toe back into that. The potential for that feeling doesn't guarantee the feeling's going to happen, but it's just jumping back into the potential of like, oh, this is, you know, a spot in which there is this in potential, and that's risk, but that's life. It's like, what the fuck am I doing in life if not to actually fucking live it? Like, what am I doing? Like, what's going on here? Like, what am I keep being so fucking afraid of? But it's, there's lots of reasons that I've come up with to be afraid of certain things, but they're all as fucking arbitrary or uncertain as any of the other things that are.
It's funny though, because we actually start to think to ourselves that one moment is somehow less risky than another. And it's just because we have the illusion of control, right? Like we have cities, we have technology, we have houses with alarms and all that stuff. You know, a lion's not going to come out of the wilderness and eat me anymore. And it's like, right, somebody might break your house down, or somebody like, might come by, or there might be a meteor, or there could be a war, or there could be anything. Like, it could be riots in the streets. Like, you don't know, not only that, but I mean, anything could happen. You could have a gas leak. I mean, anything could happen. Every day is risky. As soon as you wake up, it's risky. As soon as you go to sleep, still risky, right? But we forget that life is risk. Life is uncertain. It's just that we have this idea that we can control one day to the next. And our society has actually gotten to a point where we're relatively good at doing that. To the point where we actually don't move when the weather changes now. We're just like, nope, we can build buildings that tolerate that crap. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that's an improvement for humanity as a whole. I think we were better off when we were like, it's cold, let's go somewhere warm. It just sounded like we got exercise, we saw some new scenery, right? Like things changed for us, and now we're so stagnant. But why? Because we're afraid of change. At the end of the day, and so it just seemed like to make a lot of sense. If we could control it, why not? It's like, because we gained from not controlling it. We gained from having influence. We gained from having to work with reality. We gained from having to adapt. And again, quick shout out to our upcoming book, because we talk about a lot of this in detail. It's going to be a good book. I'm very excited about it. There are people in the audience. I just want to say thank you for joining us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, YouTube Live, and TikTok. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. We are going to be recording for a little bit longer. So if you have any questions and you want to throw them in, this is the last call. So do so. And we love all of you for asking these questions, because this is about jumping in. Andrew and I do this, and we often tell people, even people who are super angry with us, come join us for a live stream. Ask us these questions while we're live streaming, because it gives us the opportunity to not only ask ourselves and confront ourselves, but to actually have an ongoing dialogue with you about these things. Because as much as Instagram and TikTok videos are very useful for conveying a point, they're not useful for answering that point. If somebody's got questions about that, the comment section does almost nothing. Right? So if you have a question, you want to be invested in this conversation, you want to get involved, come to one of these live streams. Ask us in the comment section here, or better yet, participate in one of our live call-in shows, which happen every 2 weeks on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You can check out the calendar on our website at dualisticunity.com, because then you can be on the screen for up to 10 minutes. You can actually talk to us, ask us questions, share your story, argue with us, tell us we're full of shit. Whatever you'd like to do, it's your time, and we encourage you to do so, because that's how we grow. It does nothing for us to limit ourselves in how many people we're talking to. It does nothing for us to avoid people who are angry, which is why we go toe to toe with internet trolls. Like, hey, welcome. Since you're here, let's learn together. And that is the last thing that they expect. So while you're here, feel free. Ask a question. If you don't ask any questions this week, do join us on a Tuesday when you can ask some questions, or Wednesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. We have a free public group each and every week, and you can register at our website.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, it's fun to be able to just like, chat with people about stuff, cuz if you're not holding on to anything, or you don't feel like you're so sure of anything, then you can just jump in and throw in to a situation. And if you don't need to be sure of anything, or even knowing like you're not going to be able to be sure after the thing happens anyway, then there isn't really so much concern going in to new stuff. It's like, oh, I'm gonna find something out, gonna experience something, gonna find out something new. And it's like, with the stagnation of the world, the solidification of cities, and like it's all very much fucking expressive of control in a lot of ways. Like, no, I can absolutely control this, but like we totally miss like lost life's like the adventure of life in a lot of ways. And I think that's why sort of travel is lauded. It's like a forgotten sort of exploration of things, but it's like a I don't know. It's exciting, obviously. Like travel is a lot of fun. I enjoy traveling and seeing new places, but it's kind of like a shell of the reality of like that adventurous exploration of like stepping into uncertainty. I don't mean it like that. I don't mean that it's like some hollow shell. It's just like a variation of that. That's a little more controlled. That's all that it is. It's not it's just there's not quite there's dashes of uncertainty. And you can make it less certain by, showing up without a plan to a situation, to a new city. That was something we talked with Lisa Ann on and during that episode, whatever fucking season that was, maybe season 3 was just going to a city and showing up and not having a plan. She said she loves doing that when she's going to a new place. And it's so funny because like I can hear myself responding to that. Someone else that I know responding to that, being like, well, no, like, because then you might waste the day. You might find yourself doing something that wasn't the best thing to do. It's like, yeah, but you don't have control over what the best thing to do is. So you doing that thing, spending that time doing that, actually being fully involved in the situation as you're traveling could be the best thing to do. Like you showing up to a situation completely unplanned could be the best. It's just as much in potential as spending, you know, 75 hours planning it. It's just as much in potential as zero plan whatsoever. Just showing up raw, uncut, authentic, yourself, actually paying attention to the situation, involved in the situation, sensitive to the situation, not feeling like you're so sure about what's going on. Because as soon as you're sure about what's going on, it's a lot fucking harder to be sensitive to the situation. It's a lot harder to actually be paying attention. So, sometimes you can get caught trying to have your foot in both worlds, like trying to be sure of something, but then knowing that you can't be. So then it's like you're getting all this fucking conflict in your head, but then there's the certainty that this, whatever conflict in your head shouldn't be happening. And you're just doubling down on the certainty. And then if you're like, well, maybe I don't know if this shouldn't be happening right now. Maybe I'm not so sure that I shouldn't be in the shit right now. At least there's not that conflict. And then that, allows it to maybe unravel a little bit because it's like a point of resistance wherever I'm at, like whatever I'm going through, whatever I'm doing, even if it's a habitual sort of familiar thing that I do, I can maintain the assumption that like I shouldn't be doing it. But like who's to say that? You don't know that either. And like I'll grab for that. I'll be sure of that. It's like, no, this feeling definitely shouldn't be happening. These thoughts, this situation that I'm in right now definitely shouldn't be happening. Like, I don't know. I feel all sorts of stuff throughout the day. You
You know,
know?
that ties in really well to the next question that we have in our comment section. What should we seek if it's not control?
So I think it's not like, oh man, because seeking for control is just continuing to grasp for something you're never going to grasp. So like I can't necessarily say that that's something you shouldn't do. Like you can if you want, but there's going to be a trade-off because it's never actually going to happen. So what's the alternative? Relaxing. Like seeking and relaxing can't really go hand in hand because when you relax, like even the thought of relaxing is like I imagine myself, drop my shoulders a little bit, taking a breath, and I'm sitting here. I'm just here being myself, whatever that is. And it doesn't mean that I'm not going to continue to do stuff, but it's like seeking and doing things right now. I kind of don't go hand in hand either. Like as long as I'm seeking, like that's the thing I'm doing right now. It's like, oh, I'm reading this new book. Why are you reading the book? Well, I'm seeking more intelligence from the book. And it's like, all right, so are you reading the book or are you seeking? Well, I'm reading the book with the intention of seeking this thing. It's like, so you're not actually just reading the book for the sake of doing it. So everything has this like additional layer to it, a reason Oh, what's the point? What's even the point of this? What's the point of this conversation? What's the point of reading this book? What's the point of doing fucking anything? Because there isn't. There isn't a point. But as long as I need a point, I'm going to continue to need to do things that only reinforce this very assumptive point. Like, oh, the point is for me to get better, for me to improve, for me to become more, for me to become more than I am right now. So everything you do is going to try and reinforce that. And as you feel experiences where it's like discomforts in response to that, you then do things that make those discomforts feel better so you can get back on track to, seeking to become something other than what you are, which is fucking impossible. But you can continue to seek for something else, for something different, to lunge for more. No, but and it's just your assumptions about yourself keep changing. But so what to do outside of seek? Relax, because then that's actually prioritizing your experience right now. Because as you're seeking, you're discounting life. You're discounting your experience right now. And that's all you got. That's all you ever have. It's the only thing you ever have to pay attention to or relax in response to is whatever is happening right now. But a common way of avoiding what's happening right now is seeking. And then it's like you never actually live your life. You're always doing it you're taking this step for the second step. So you're living a second stepped life.
Exactly. Well said. It's so funny because that's the alternative, right? You stop seeking, and what you end up with is expanded awareness. So it's like, what should we seek instead of control? It's like, well, don't. And what you end up with is awareness. And that's the alternative to control, influence, right? Actually taking your moment to moment existing and just bending all of your attention to it, just paying attention to it, not getting in your own way. And that's the problem with control, is it gets in the way. Instead of just organically working with each and every moment, you have a set path that you want those moments to go in, and you do everything you can to try and corral them into that path. And it changes what you get out of everything, because now you're cherry picking. Now you think you know what's best. Now you actually have an idea of where you should be going, instead of growing from each and every moment in a way that is more organic and suited to your environment, to your life as a whole. See, that's the whole thing. Like, if you were to look at, let's say, animals that adapt over time, animals that evolve versus animals that don't, natural selection, right? The animals that evolve are the ones that are paying attention, and the ones that don't are the ones that are in their heads, not paying attention, not changing, not adapting, holding on to what they used to know, holding on to how they used to do things, holding on to what's familiar, right? So it's in letting go of that you allow yourself to adapt, not in a way that you think you should, because that's all based on the past, but in a way that you actually should, that you actually are, based on what's happening in the present. And so I would say that that's the big thing, is it's not seeking, as Andrew said, it's living. It's like, what should we seek? Well, the alternative is just to live your life. You could not think that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or a Shangri-La to reach, an enlightenment, a heaven. You can let go of all of that and actually just put all of the quality of your attention, without self-judgment, because you're not trying to get anywhere. So there's no right path, there's no right way. You can let go of all of that shit and actually just live your life here in this moment, recognizing that you bring the weight with you. And that's exactly what would change everything, is if we all just did that, which is exactly what John Lennon was talking about. And imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, all above us, only sky. Like he's talking about, imagine if we were just here in reality. That's what he's saying, which is the funniest part about the song Imagine. Because we've been so caught up in our heads for so long that we are playing a game of pretend in numerous ways that we don't see, to the point where being in reality actually seems like something that's far-fetched and beyond our ability.
Well said. Do you have any other
I am out of
questions?
questions. That is
I
it for
have
my end.
I have one more. We've talked
I
about
lie.
all right. Nice. I have one other. We talked about solipsism. We've talked about it in the past. I am not sure, but I'm pretty sure we have. I don't know if we've done a community topics.
You know,
Um,
it's funny because that was one of the very first accusations I ever dealt with when I released that video from 2005. Solipsism. And it's because I'm saying that nothing exists outside of your awareness. What I'm questioning is the idea of what you are, right? And so that's the whole thing because we're talking solipsism is the idea that nothing exists except you and your mind, right? So you can see how that might be problematic. But oddly enough, that's often what people end up getting caught in when they're thinking about themselves all the time. They don't even realize that they think everything comes back to them, but that's how they perceive the world when they're thinking about themselves as an identity. So that's kind of funny because that's solipsism on its ass. But what we're talking about here in terms of the reality, and this is why I like referring to it as solipsistic pantheism, because pantheism is the idea that everything is God, that everything is God. And solipsism is the idea that everything is you. And they're both true, right? It's because you are not what you're thinking of, and what remains is what is. And that is exactly what's aware of itself, what is. Everything in reality is aware of itself. Isn't that funny? And yet we still end up thinking that it's separate things. You know, like every cell in my body is aware of itself as me. But I lack the perspective because frankly I'm too busy looking at myself in a certain way to understand that I'm connected to everything, despite the fact that it's fucking obvious. Like it's ridiculously obvious. It's just that we suffer from extreme cognitive dissonance in terms of we don't want to see that we are connected because it would require us to let go of our selfish ambitions, right? Like it's much harder to justify getting yours, Jack, when it hurts other people that are also you.
well said. Yeah. And so the question was, is solipsism paradoxical? And so I guess, I mean, everything you just said is kind of can be a response to that, basically, that it, there is the perspective of you and everything being your mind, but that's not what you think. Like, because anytime you say me or you, it can be immediately filtered through an image, through perception, right? And that's kind of a lot of what Jesus was talking about with, I mean, where I think, as you said before, he got kind of caught up or tied up was in, using a lot of those words. So anyway, um, with solipsism, it's fascinating because it is right in front of us all the time, and it's just like layers upon layers of cognitive dissonance, but it's also just one mechanism of all of that cognitive dissonance, believing that I can be sure of something, of anything ever. So it's yeah, it's a fun one for sure.
It is a fun one. We do have a few more questions that have emerged in the last few moments since you were talking. There was two that came first, but there's one that I want to ask first because honestly, I've wondered the same thing. Andrew, how come so many people ask you what your freaking skincare routine is in your comment sections? Like, what's up with that for real?
Dude, it's a great question. I'm not quite sure. We have talked a little bit about that because I would say that Ray should be getting that question far more frequently than I do, considering we're a good 16 years apart, and that man is glowing. So I don't know why there aren't more on Coalition for You and Transcending Me account. So that's going to be my very presidential non-answer right there. Is why aren't there more? Right. But I do think there is a stress component that comes with a lot of the shit that we do to ourselves, and it's interesting when you become maybe more aware of your own habits, behaviors, and you can let them go a little bit more. It's like you feel like you're feeling more and like there's more intensity, but like someone who maybe feels like they're not feeling as much or they're more tense or more, suppressant of certain things, trying to be something, like all of that tension is still under the surface. And so something like, I don't know, skin or disease or whatever is going to be like come up through other ways, through other mechanisms, is like the underlying tension. A lot of that is death and respond to extreme tension that like we don't want to recognize. So the more it's like the more you feel, the more potential you have to be healthy, and like the more you're willing to relax and just feel everything, like your body's not taking quite so much of a hit. And so yeah, I don't anyway. Those
That's a
some
good
I know
answer.
that wasn't really a response to that specific question, but it's what I got.
I thought it was a good answer. Certainly better than my answer. It's because they're fucking superficial. That's why. That's my answer. Is because that's what they're looking for. Is what they value in themselves. So that is why they ask so often. That is why they come into a conversation that has relative depth and they just miss it entirely, which is both entertaining and slightly sad. But it would only be really sad if you have some expectation. As far as I'm concerned, they're just on the path, and that's it. It's like, what's that? You're self-absorbed and superficial at the moment. Buckle up, because life's about to kick you in the nuts. That's more or less it. We do have another question, but I'll pass it to Andrew first if you have any questions.
Uh is there this is kind of funny. I'm sure you got something in there. Is there anything you know you need to talk about but can't or won't? That's actually a very interesting question. I think I'm kind of curious. I kind of want to throw this to Ray if there's anything that's I don't know, something maybe that you say you don't make videos about certain insights or thoughts, and if there's something you want to just like fucking throw in there towards the end of this episode here.
That's a really good question. I think it would really depend on what the context is. Um, like for example, I typically don't make videos about. Well, actually, a good point would be the conversation that we were having earlier this morning, before we started recording. Our episode of Raw, which I think was episode 140, that'll be released later. We were talking about the distinction between neurotypical and neurodivergent, and that's something that I've avoided talking about to a very large degree, and it's only because I understand that when somebody holds on to a label and they oversimplify that label and then you question that label, they feel like you're questioning them. That if you're invalidating the concept as being superficial or overly simplistic, they feel invalidated. And so there are certain things that I don't go towards, which would be like that. For example, like perfect example, when we're talking about neurodivergent versus neurotypical, people actually make the mistake of thinking that that's a difference in their brain. Like people actually make the mistake of thinking there is an actual physical distinction between neurodivergent and neurotypical. And almost 100% of the fucking time, that is not the case. That it is only a difference in how you think and behave. And yet I will hear people go around going, oh, I was talking to this guy and he was such a neurotypical. How do you know that? How do you know that? You don't. You don't know that. What you know is that they've displayed certain traits that you've made assumptions about to validate yourself. And what's funny is that if you had a moment like that and I brought it up, you'd say you were masking. How do you know they're not? Because what is masking other than putting on a mask that you think is going to be societally acceptable? And we all fucking do that. So that would be one of the topics that I don't often get into. There are others, but just throwing that one out for now. We'll get into nationalism another time. I know there was a long period of time on the podcast where we didn't get into gender identity, and that was a topic that I was avoiding for the most part because I was still working through it to a very large degree, because it's very difficult to have these conversations about identity as a whole. It doesn't matter if it's religion, nationalism. It does not matter what it is. Okay, if you have a conversation about identity and somebody holds on to that identity as truth, as a testament to their value and worth and community and fitting in and all that shit, you are going to offend someone. And so it's really important to kind of go through it and recognize how to empathize with them first. Because this isn't a war against conceptualism. It's not a war against identity. This is understanding ourselves. This is actually coming to terms with what identity does and why we invest in it. And if I'm out there attacking people who are still identifying, or if I'm out there deliberately offending people who are still identifying for the sake of validating myself, well, then I'm missing a lesson. Whereas if I am deliberately speaking to a point that I know is going to offend someone based on their state of mind, not because of my deliberate intent, but despite me trying to avoid it, there's nothing I can do about that. So it's an excellent opportunity to kind of dig into yourself and find out, like, are you trying to change people, or are you just trying to point something out that's hurting them? And that's not telling them to change. It's just giving them the opportunity to take in more information.
And oftentimes that just comes down to being yourself and letting whatever happens happen in the moment without so much of a fucking perspective of that. But just yeah, just able to not make so many assumptions necessarily about them, or that there is a right or a wrong way to be or act or live, or any of it, because it's more comfortable to think, oh no, there's a right way and I know it. Like, or there isn't, and you just have to keep paying attention to what's going on. And then it's not about changing anyone. It's not even like something that you feel like you got to do, but because it's like empathy, empathy has its own action, in the sense that I've never thought of it like that. Oh shit. Empathy has its own action in the sense of when you're not holding on to a right way or a right answer, but that's combined with empathy. It's like there are actions that stem from that. It's not that empathy itself leads to, you know, yeah, I never really thought about that. When you're just being empathetic, there's a natural sort of action that comes with that. As opposed, I can't even remember how I was thinking about it before. It's like that empathy, sort of when you're empathetic, you act in a certain way, which is kind of the same thing, but like not really. Like when you're being empathetic, there's actions that stem from that that don't have to do with your maybe conceptual idea of what empathy is. Because empathy does tend to have, the comfortable, nice undertone to it. And that's not it either. Empathy is raw. Empathy is very, very uncut, in the sense that it doesn't fall on one side of the spectrum or the other. It's just that you're there with them and you're interacting with yourself. And so anyway, one of the things you said about the neurodivergent, neurotypical, that I wanted to mention was just like you said at the end there with the masking, and like how, so it's basically like neurotypical is just people who are better at masking than
And don't know they're
neurodivergent
doing it.
and
That's
have
the
no
worst part.
idea.
They have no idea they're doing it. They're just doing it because they've been well conditioned. And yet, we'll look at them as thinking that somehow, they're the ones that are better off. I wouldn't say that's the case.
At all. And there's just a difference in the repercussions to it. And like how much of our experience is not like is like all the things, the ways we think about reality, the world, certain, anxiety, fear, worry, greed, anger, depression, enlightenment. Like they're all words, but they're all ways of defining like where we're at on a spectrum. So like who's to say as mentality shifts as we shift, like those words aren't even like it's not even the same words used anymore. Like those feelings, the feeling of fear, worry, concern, like anger, joy, enthusiasm, love, like they're all significantly different in a different mentality. And so they're kind of just responses or things that we experience or feel based on an underlying mentality. And they're all sort of expressions of that. But makes me wonder. Did we have any more
Actually,
questions?
it's funny because we do have two more, but these are going to be quick because one of which we already answered. How do you feel about seeking evolution? This is the very same answer as seeking control. Whatever you're seeking, you're getting in the way of in terms of evolution, or in terms of alignment, or in terms of happiness, fulfillment, authenticity, being yourself. Just be you. So you don't need to seek evolution. The idea of evolution is you change with your environment as you pay attention to it. So it takes care of itself. Just pay attention. Second question: any tips to be more easily authentic? Now, the funny part about this question is that any answer I give you actually makes it more difficult for you to be authentic, because then you're doing what I'm saying instead of doing what you're doing. So if you'd like to be more authentic, just admit you're confused. Stop trying to find an answer. Stop trying to be certain. Stop trying to be something. Stop trying to feel a certain way about yourself, and just admit you don't know. And then whatever comes out of you at that point is about as authentic as it can be. Until then, it's just authentically trying to be an illusion.
That should go on some merch. Authentically trying to be an illusion. Because, oh God. Yeah, you can't even answer that. There's nothing that you could possibly even say that. And it's like the best thing someone could do in response to that is literally just like not say anything or give any sort of direction, because it's the directionless is when you're being authentic, when you're not relying upon, looking down the path. What's this going to mean? Where's this going to go? What's going to happen here? What's going to stem from this situation if I do this like this? But what if I do this like this? And it's all just trying to calculate your life. It's trying to calculate life. It's trying to come up with how life should be. It's trying to live your life before you live it. It's trying to live your life without even living it. And what's the trade-off? You feel like you're in control, but you don't actually live life. You don't actually fucking live. That's the trade-off. You never actually fucking just are there in life happening, because there's so many reasons you gotta, you know, peel back, step back, hesitate. Oh, can't do that, can't do this, can't do this, can't do that, can't respond like that, can't say this, can't do this thing, can't act this way. And that's the shift typically from like going from child to adult, is just more and more hesitation, more and more rigidity, more and more tension, less play, less relaxation. And so child to adult is really just, it's like the responsibility progresses, but so does the tension. And is there an experience where you're both responsible and more relaxed? Like this responsibility increases, but it doesn't lose, it's not at the cost of relaxation, right? Makes me wonder. So, anyway, I don't really remember what that question was, but
It was a question about authenticity, about just being yourself, which nobody can teach you. Oddly enough, it's kind of like being or making decisions. If you want to get better at it, just keep doing it. If you want to be yourself, just keep doing it. Well, how do you know you're being yourself? It's when you're not thinking about it. It's when you're just being yourself. But that means paying attention, allowing yourself to change, not holding on to an idea of yourself, not trying to be an idea of yourself. And all of that just means relaxing, getting out of the way. And that's a bit of a practice. It's true at first until you realize it doesn't have to be. Because the only reason it's a practice is because you have a habit of holding on. So as long as you have the habit of holding on, you need to practice letting go until you get rid of the habit. Then you don't need to practice. Then it's just a choice here and now. This has been a lot of fun. A great episode. In fact, I've really been enjoying these. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I don't believe Andrew has any further questions.
I do not. That was all that I had. Yeah, yeah, that was
In
it.
that case, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Do keep in mind that we have Q&A episodes / call-in shows now every 2 weeks. So if you would like to submit a question, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, you can do so on our Patreon page, patreon.com / dualistic unity. We host groups 5 days a week. So if you want to chat with us yourself, definitely join us there. It's the place to be, and it informs so much of what we do on the podcast and in the community and everything else. But that's about it. So definitely suggest some topics, ask some questions. We have a community topic episode coming up in the near future. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.